Hey, you guys. Um, so I am making this little video for you because I want to talk to you about a few things about the novel. So we're reading Slaughterhouse-Five, and hopefully you're not struggling as much as I'm imagining. So the last time we talked about kind of the timeline of the novel, in that it doesn't quite follow like a chronological timeline. And so instead of trying to latch on to time as a way to like organize information, I was telling you that you should be looking for association. So like that would be like similar experiences that Billy Pilgrim is experiencing throughout time. So like I said last time, an association could be like when he goes back to Dresden and he's a prisoner of war. Are there any similarities? Are there any connections between like that experience for Billy Pilgrim and, say, when he is abducted by the aliens? He is also a prisoner there. So, are there some similarities? Are they just like totally different? But what you're trying to do is make associations between experiences rather than kind of categorize and understand what's going on through time, like logical time. So today I want to talk about, mostly I want to talk about different themes in the book. There's a ton of them. But I also want to give you a little background on Kurt Vonnegut so that the point is I want to help you see the things that you should associate and notice some of the themes that Vonnegut is writing about. So first I want to give you just a little background information on Kurt Vonnegut. And so Kurt Vonnegut was actually born in 1922. So if you can imagine 1922, the First World War has really just ended. And so people are trying to bounce back from that. People have lost husbands and sons in the First War. There is a ton of PTSD. They were calling it shell shock, just from the soldiers' experience in war. And so life wasn't like normal. And that is how Vonnegut came into the world. Like that's the environment he was born into. And then less than a decade later, we've got the Great Depression happens. And so Vonnegut has a rough childhood. I mean, originally his parents had money, and so they were able to survive the Great Depression. They just, had to move out of their mansion and into a small house. But the effects were still there. They weren't maybe to the same extreme as other people who maybe, had to live on the streets and didn't have food. Vonnegut had to attend public schools instead of private schools. So there were some effects. The point is that he is living through it. And then, of course, after that is World War II, and Vonnegut has to go fight. So he was able to spend a little time at Cornell University, where he actually studied chemistry and biology. So he was definitely a scientist, has a sciencey mind. He's drawn to science fiction, but he's also a writer, and he wrote for the school newspaper and all that. But before the war was over, he actually had to join up and go to war. While he was in the military, he actually studied mechanical engineering, which is another kind of interesting like trait of his. We kind of tend to think of people as like one track, but he was studying chemistry, biology, mechanical engineering, and he was still writing. So in 1944, the war is not over yet, but it's on the kind of downward slope. And so the short time that Vonnegut was actually in the war, he experienced some major trauma. And so he was actually in the Battle of the Bulge, which is a big battle. Don't ask me about these things. I know it's a famous battle from World War II. I know it was a major loss for the Allied forces, so it was a big deal. But I don't have all of those battles in my memory. And so in the middle of that loss, he was captured by the Germans as a prisoner and became a prisoner of war. He was sent to Dresden, where he was put to work. And so he lived in a slaughterhouse, and a slaughterhouse is like where they kill animals for meat. So it's the place that they would do all the butchering and then store the meat. And so the slaughterhouse itself, or the meat locker where he lived with other people, was actually underground. And so in 1945, this is about almost a year later. Let me see. No, about 3 months later, the Americans and the British come through and actually bomb Dresden. And so there's something important about Dresden. Honestly, I'd never heard of Dresden until I read this book. And it might be because it makes Americans look kind of bad, because Dresden, the city, was kind of a neutral space. So, like, both sides had kind of agreed to avoid Dresden. But because of that, Dresden became a kind of a safe space for all kinds of refugees, especially German refugees who were not a part of the war effort. And so because there were all these Germans there, ultimately the Americans and the British joined up and bombed Dresden. Dresden was also a cultural epicenter. And so that was another part of the reason for not bombing Dresden, because, you know, it's art and culture, and we don't want to destroy that. So that bombing that happened, you know, Vonnegut is an American, and he's being bombed by Americans, and he is lucky to be saved from the bombing, because the place he lived, the slaughterhouse, the meat locker of the slaughterhouse, is underground. So he survives the bombing. So after the bombing, he's still a prisoner of war, but by the time the war is kind of winding down, he is rescued and he does rehabilitation in France and then heads back to the United States, and quickly returns to school, because this is who Vonnegut is. And so now, as a graduate student, he studies anthropology, and anthropology is the study of, like, human cultures. And so that's another interesting part of Vonnegut's like education, and I would say influence in what he, you know, draws in for his writing. So study of cultures, chemistry, biology, mechanical engineering, and then, you know, he's also writing. So he began, after returning from the war, he began publishing novels and magazine stories and essays and all kinds of stuff. And at the time when he publishes Slaughterhouse-Five, the postmodernists of the time really kind of considered the novel as being a dead form of art. And that's because the novel follows these traditional conventions for writing. And so when Slaughterhouse-Five comes out, and really, you know, Vonnegut is not following those conventions of writing, it was like immediately a bestseller. And Vonnegut got like literary fame while he's still alive, and that doesn't always happen. And then he went on to write and write and write and write and write. He actually returned to Dresden when he was much older, and he I don't know if he had any kids. I feel like he had a daughter, maybe. Anyway, I already shared with you guys the historical context of the time. And so, like I said at the beginning, Vonnegut's born in 1922, right after the First World War. He lives through the Great Depression. He lives through and experiences the Second World War. And then after that, he is going into the 1950s. And the 1950s is like a Holden Caulfield time frame where everybody's trying to return to this like normal, idealized life like that was happening before the war. And so there's like, the white picket fence that everybody's happy. Like dishwashers are becoming a convenient thing for people. Like, and so people are having more free time and kind of opens up space for hobbies and like laziness and maybe luxuries. And so in this time frame in the 50s, you have to kind of imagine everybody's just taking a deep breath after the previous 30 years of war that has been devastating, and poverty, and just all of these things going on. And it's been hard. It's been a hard life for the majority of the United States. And so when you get to the 50s and people are finally like rebounding from all of that, they just want to take it easy, which is totally understandable. But with that comes a lot of complacency, like apathy, like you stop kind of caring about your fellow human, and you're really just more concerned about yourself. And so when you get to the 60s, you've got a lot of rebellion against that, because there are still war heroes that are home that are disabled and not being taken care of. And there are still people dealing with mental illness, and there's no services for them. There is still deep segregation is happening, and women don't have the same rights as men. And definitely people of color are the second class citizens. So by the time you get to the 60s, there's just constant revolution and rebellion. And so when we get to Slaughterhouse-Five, really, it's in that space of just like overhauling culture that Slaughterhouse-Five is not just written, but also published. And so I'm sure it makes sense for the people reading it in that cultural time period that it really resonates, because it's not doing what's normal, what's traditional. So let me scooch forward in my notes. So that's kind of a little bit more in detail about the context of the novel, and a little bit information on Vonnegut. But I wanted specifically to talk about some themes in Slaughterhouse-Five. There's a lot of them. So one of them that stands out is just relativity. This idea that everything is relative, time is relative, truth is relative. And ultimately what that means is like individuals make our own truth. So there's not really any right and there's not wrong. It's just how we perceive and understand things. And this is definitely a rebellion against like the traditional like Christianity of the time, and really kind of any kind of religion that is teaching right and wrong. There's this idea of relativity that like, it's not wrong. There's no right and wrong. It's just, how do you understand things? How did you experience them? How did you perceive them? Because in 10 years, you might perceive things differently. And so an example of that is any time, and I can't remember the exact line from the novel, but it's so it goes. So you'll see that little phrase, so it goes. And it's kind of like, it is what it is. so it goes. Like, that's just what happens. And that is very connected to this idea of relativity. Like, and that includes towards death. Like, death isn't scary or something to be feared or avoided. It's just like, death is just part of what happens. And the problem with this attitude, it seems a little safe because, you know, you are unaffected by things. But the reality is, if you are unaffected by things, then, like, if things need to change, or if there isn't any justice, or like, you're disconnected from all of that. And so there is no, you don't have the will to make changes or to grow if you're just stuck in this apathy, this attitude of, it is what it is. So it goes. So that is an attitude of the time period. I would say probably I could imagine that is the attitude of, you know, white people of the time who are financially taken care of, you know, whatever the negative aspects of the culture, you know, like the segregation or any kind of unfairness, discrimination, you know, if it doesn't affect them, then it's like, it is what it is. There's nothing I can do about it. And so Vonnegut is including that as a theme. It's a theme of the time that he is living, and it's a theme in the novel. Another one, sorry, I've got some notes here. Relativity. This idea that, and this is related to relativity, but there's this idea that free will is an illusion. And so that's a theme in this novel. Like, for example, like Billy he's not in control of his life. When he is time traveling, he doesn't have control over it. It's just happening. He doesn't know when it's going to happen. He doesn't know where he's going. Sometimes good things happen. Sometimes bad things happen. But it's like, he doesn't have any control over his situation. And so there's this idea that free will is an illusion. Like we don't really get to choose who we are or who we become or what actions we take. And it's like what's happened before will keep happening regardless of what I do about it. And that's a really difficult viewpoint of life. Like, how do you do anything or engage in anything? Like, what's the point? Like, why keep living? And I'm not saying don't live. I'm just saying, in that mindset that free will is an illusion, free will meaning you have the option to choose in what direction you go and how you live your life. I mean, I think that's the difference between you just sitting around waiting for things to happen and then in you going out and making things happen. So another theme in this novel is that chronological time is an illusion. And we see that because, I mean, we see it already, Billy bouncing back and forth through time. And just like Billy's life, the structure of the novel itself is kind of spastic, meaning it's not linear. It's just there's no like real traditional beginning, middle, and end. And I think this comes from this idea. It's an idea of the time period. Again, I mean, Einstein has published his theory of relativity. They're kind of making progress in like the speed of light, and time itself is being questioned, like culturally. And so that's showing up in the novel with all of like Billy's jumping around. And so time, his deal, like Vonnegut's dealing with time, is also kind of representative of his education. I mean, he does have a science background and he does have an anthropology background. And so, you know, he's saying, you know, time is really just an illusion. Which we could get on that philosophical bandwagon and talk about that for days, probably. And then, like I said before, anti-war, you know, Vonnegut was anti-war. And it is a theme in the book. And so Vonnegut, like, accepts that war will happen. But I think Vonnegut's tone about war in the book is really, like, sarcastic. I think Vonnegut would say, like, we could avoid it. But he refers to, like, the military industrial complex. And that feels like something that you cannot control. Like what I imagine is this big thing that cannot be controlled. And the military industrial complex determines when we will go to war and will profit from war. So, like, while Vonnegut accepts, like, war as, like, being a part of life, he still wants to show how horrible it is. And in not just the soldiers they're experiencing it, but also this military industrial complex behind the scenes that profits from people dying for this war, for money, you know. And war is more complex than that. Not that I'm supporting war or against war. I'm just saying, you know, everybody involved on an individual level has their reasons for participating. And so, regardless, Vonnegut is very anti-war. The novel's also anti-hero. Like, if you think about Billy, he's our hero, but he is not very heroic. So it's like, this is an anti-hero because he's weak and he doesn't create change. Like, he's he's not very courageous. He's pretty, like, listless. Like, he's not, like, full of action or saving anything. He's not very macho. I mean, you don't have to be macho to be a hero, but can be a heroic trait. So this book is anti-hero. Like, I mean, a hero doesn't exist. And I think about World War II, like, recruiting posters where it's like, they're glorifying war, you know, trying to recruit soldiers, you know, by this idea of being a hero, when all reality is like, soldiers don't get to be heroes. They have to follow orders. So, you know, and I'm not saying that they can't be courageous, but I'm just saying, like, it's not this person of free will who can go out and save the downtrodden. And I mean, you are following orders. And if the orders are to bomb Dresden, where 135 German civilians are murdered, you know, like, that doesn't feel very heroic. And so Vonnegut is challenging this idea of anti-hero, like, that heroism should not be glorified like this, like military heroism. Anyway, finally, I'll say this isn't totally 100% like negative. There is this idea of renewal and kind of reinvention that's also a theme. So there's some, and this is where some of the glimmers of hope. It's like, yeah, let's point out all of the problems in society, but, like, what do we do about it? So, like, for one, in the novel, for the Tralfamadorians, like, they don't really believe that death is the end. And so there's this idea that, while death is a part of life, it's not the end of life, and that there's some hope in that. he also, in the midst of like that apathy, that like we don't have this free will, we can't do anything, life is just what happens to you. In the middle of that, there's also things that can emotionally deeply affect you that kind of draw us out of that apathy. Um, and that is an example of like renewal. Like we don't have to stay in that apathetic space. I mean, if this was just 100% dark, Billy would have died in the bombing, right? But he doesn't. I mean, he survives, and he doesn't just survive. I mean, he recovers in a lot of ways, and he finds success. He finds a life after that. So, you know, that's still part of the novel, like this hope of renewal. And if you think back into the cultural context, you know, this 1950s sort of conservative, living for yourself, apathy, of just, if it doesn't affect me, it doesn't affect me. So I'm not going to do anything about it. You know, this is a call by Vonnegut to like come out of that, and be affected by life. So anyway, I'm going to wrap it up from here. So I just want to talk, I mean, I just want to talk about just, that's what, this is what I want to do. I just wanted to talk about kind of the themes of the book, because you need things to latch onto. So am I expecting you to have all of these things memorized? No, but if anything that I said made sense to you, like latch on to that theme, and as you're reading, keep it there. Like, relativity, we talked about that at the beginning. It is what it is kind of mentality. Free will is an illusion. Like you don't have any, you can't make any decisions about your life. It just happens to you. Chronological time is an illusion. Anti-war, anti-hero, and then renewal. This hope that there's more. We can start over. We don't have to keep doing what we're doing. So if any of those themes, like you're already thinking of things, like latch on to that and look for those experiences that show this theme, and that will help you more, like tracking things in the novel. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap it up here. You guys are awesome. We're basically 2 weeks down in this 6 weeks, so you're so close to the end. Okay, bye.